Okay. Any other announcements? We're good. We're in the Torah today. So are there enough Chumashim, or should we go get some more? We got page 840, please. Okay. Hi, come on in. Nice to have you guys here. Come on in. Pull up a chumash. Pull up a chair. You get a chumash? There's a few out here. Jack, there's some out there. Yeah, there were a few here, so they're good. They're good. We're good. Okay, ready? We all here? 1964, in the summertime, I was 10 years old, and my mother took me and my three brothers on a train all the way back to New Jersey, where we came from, to spend the summer with our cousins. Brave lady, right? And we got to go a couple of times to the New York World's Fair, which, for my money, was the last great World's Fair there ever was, right? It was in Flushing Park, the Unisphere, and and we got to go all these rides, and it was just a marvelous fair. And the ride that I remember, because they resurrected it at Disneyland, was the GE Carousel of Progress. Now, the kunz of this thing was that you sat in the audience, and the stage stayed still, but the audience moved around, and there were 5 scenes. And in each scene, from each decade of the 20th century, they showed all the new modern things that GE had brought to life. So in the first one was something around the 1890s, 1900s, and vacuum cleaners and things. Then the next one was the 20s, and there was radio. And the next one was like the 40s. The last one was the 70s, was contemporary. And the guy had this was in 1964, the guy had a VCR. Yeah, and the size of this, it was bigger than the television, right? And he said you can record programs. It was like, whoa, right? And it was a color TV. And each time that the audience moved around the scenes, there was this jingle. It's a great, big, beautiful tomorrow, shining at the end of every day. It's a great, big, beautiful tomorrow, and tomorrow's just a dream away. And then it goes on. And because in each scene, it was all a big commercial for GE, because these things that GE brings, brings to life, or brings into the world, and how it's revolutionized, modern life. Now, I had a professor, I had a sociology professor in college who once did actually a critique of this ride. And which sort of spoiled it, because, this is what happens when you get a sociology professor. And he showed that in each successive scene, there were fewer people. Like that in the first scene, the whole family lived in the same house. Like mom and dad and kids and grandma and grandpa and the dog, right? And then in the next scene, it was just mom and dad and the kids. And in the last scene, it was just the guy by himself. He had retired or something, and his kids were far away. And he said, this is what GE has done. GE, the appliances have alienated us from each other. Forget that. Here's what I want to think. But the attitude of, it's a great, big, beautiful tomorrow, shining at the end of every day. What happened to that? Remember John Kennedy's inauguration speech, where he talked about a new generation taking control of America, right? And a new attitude, a new frontier, he talked about, the reaching for the moon, reaching out to our enemies, right? And you had this, there was, in 1960, even after the assassination of Kennedy in 63, there was still this sense of palpable optimism. Better and better every day. Monsanto, better living through chemistry, right? The guy who was the drug dealer in my college had that T-shirt, so he promised the same thing, right? What happened to that? What happened to that? I mean, we have the technology that the GE Carousel of Progress advertised as revolutionary, we have long since eclipsed, right? right? It's even funny, by the way, sometimes I like to watch, my dad and I love science fiction, so I like to watch old episodes of Star Trek, right? It was 24th century, also optimistic. Gene Roddenberry, a great optimist, right? But even in Star Trek, there's some of the things in Star Trek that we've now even eclipsed, right? Their communicators look like flip phones. And you say, like, what, you don't have an iPhone? 24th century. Well, it's a government project. It just, these kinds. And so the question, here is the question. What is the attitude of optimism, of looking forward, of adventure, of a sense that tomorrow is going to bring things better than yesterday, as opposed to the opposite, which is a deep sense of either fret, worry, endangerment, scare, or a sense of not just fear, but a sense of downright pessimism. It's getting worse, not better. And when did America switch from one to the other? And what happens to the culture? Today we're going to read a story about people who go to take a peek into their future. And they come back with two very different responses about what they see. And what we're going to discover in the story is that what they went to go look at was not the land they were about to live in. What they went to go look at was their own hearts. The reconnaissance mission was not a reconnaissance into territory. It was a reconnaissance mission into soul. And it has to do with what attitude do you accept every day and look forward to tomorrow. The difference between a culture that says it's a great, big, beautiful tomorrow shining at the end of every day. And this morning on NPR, I don't know how many of you wake up to NPR. I don't recommend it because it'll give you a headache. But this morning there was a very long piece this morning. The most popular off-Broadway show in New York is 1984. It's a British production of 1984. And what they did is they were interviewing the actors, the director, and the guy who wrote the play, because he says it's so interesting. It's a small off-Broadway theater in New York, so there's a great deal of interaction between the audience and the actors. It's not like one of these theaters where the show's way up there. You're right next to the stage, and people engage in conversations with the actors. So the actors, like the person who was interviewing this, like what happens? She said, well, it depends upon what happened in the news that day, right? Like they said, we did the show the night that Trump announced that he's pulling out of the Paris Accords, and people were like raging through the whole show. It's just very interesting. So what is the difference between a utopian outlook and a dystopian outlook? Or a sense of optimism or a sense of deep fear and pessimism? And where does that come from? What made us that way? And what's the difference in the way that you accept the world? That's what we're going to take a look at today. You brought something. What'd you bring?
Yeah. Brachot 55b.
Okay.
Exactly what you just said.
The bright rabbis, right?
Unbelievable. Shmuel Bar Nachmani. He wrote, Ein marin lo le'adam ela mahar harei libo, which means we do not see the world as it is. We see the world as we are.
Uh-huh. Right.
That's what I thought.
So good. So this is a reconnaissance mission, and it turns out that it's not a reconnaissance mission outward.
Exactly what you
it's
said.
a reconnaissance mission inward. It's the way that you structure your universe. Hi, Michael.
Sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead. No.
But this relates to what we're talking about. A number of years ago, there was a book written called The Way It Never Was, written by a sociologist
Uh-huh.
who talked about this yearning for the past. And, what we always think about the golden past.
Yeah.
And it's a book, it's about 300 pages, very well documented. I wish I could remember the name of the author now, but I will send you the email.
Okay, good.
And it talks about the fact that what we think of as the golden age of the past was really pretty miserable.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, we talk about, for instance, we talk about today about homelessness and all that sort of thing. In the 1930s, it was 50% worse.
Yeah. Yeah.
Homelessness was worse. Men had left their families because they couldn't afford to stay with their families. There were single mothers, families with only mothers in them, things like that.
Yeah.
It goes all the way back. If you take
Right.
And brings you up, she wrote the book in about 1990 something.
Right.
And it's an incredible way of looking at it.
Uh-huh.
Talking about where are we? Who are we?
And what's the difference between a culture that sees its golden age as in the past and a culture which sees its golden age in the future? Right? And even that, it's like one of the comments, it's not that book, but they say even nostalgia isn't what it used to be, you can't even long for the past. But this idea that the golden age happened and we have to recover it is a common theme in culture. But that's a very interesting idea. We have to, return to, go back to, as opposed to a golden age that's ahead of us. It's a very different sense of confidence in the self, confidence in the world, confidence in the culture, right? And how is it that John Kennedy could evince a certain kind of cultural optimism when, objectively the world was a hell of a lot different then? We grew up in this. I grew up here in the San Fernando Valley. Every night, the ground would shake and the sky would light up as they were testing rockets up at Rocketdyne, right? And every kid in my elementary school, except for me, his dad worked at Rocketdyne. And ostensibly, they were building the engines for the Saturn V rocket to go to the moon. But what they were really building, they were building ICBMs. Right? They were building, that's why there are all these Nike bases all across the valley, because this was ground zero. Some of you went to California elementary schools. We used to have these drop drills, and they weren't for earthquakes. There was when 100 million megatons of Russian fury would drop on my elementary school. You got under your fiber, your Formica-topped plywood desk, and that would save you, right? And there was this stance that they taught. I can't do it because I'm not limber like that anymore. Where you got down on your knees, you tucked your hand, and then someone came up with you, and you kiss your tuchel goodbye. I mean, because it's like what? Then there was a film strip. They really showed us this. Like, don't look into the light. Well, yeah, because But that was America. And still in that environment, you could have a president say, it's a great, big, beautiful tomorrow. And then somewhere we lost that. And somewhere there's a sense of, at most you get a return to a golden age, and at worst you get a terrible sense of pessimism. I get it. And it's not Trump, by the way. In anything, he's a symptom of this, not the cause of it. There's a much bigger sense of cultural pessimism and cultural threat. And that, I want to get into the Torah, because that's what the Torah is about. Yes?
Part of that is technology.
Yes, of course it's tech.
My parents grew up in a world with radio as their primary means of entertainment.
Yes.
Think about that. That leaves you imagination. I grew up without the internet, so that I actually had some time to go outside, and my kids grow up in a world of 24/7 connectivity.
Yeah.
So
Well, why doesn't that make you happier, though? It should make...
Each one of those
you
is
should,
taking away from something.
well, that's interesting. I mean, the question is, in the end, does it contribute or does it deter, human evolution? That's the question. That's a very good question.
We had control over things, that we felt like we had some sort of control.
Yeah?
Here, we don't feel that same control. Things are spiraling out of.
That's very true. That's very, very true. There really is a sense of, I can't control it. It's out of our power. Even the most powerful can't control it, right? By the way, this is why, this is my own little thesis from, as an extension from what Rabbi Gelman taught last week, which is, this is why all the movies that are successful are about superheroes, right? What is a culture, what do you do when you're worshiping superheroes, right? You're saying normal people can't control the world. You've got to be an Amazonian princess, And by the way, Kanai Nahara. I have been waiting for Godot. She has done more to make Israel attractive in American than all of the Hasbara, all of the propaganda, all of the single-handed. I had a group of Israeli leaders here the other day, and I said, in Hebrew, I said to them, you sent us matana yafa ma'od. You sent us a beautiful gift, and we just want to say thank you, right? Because it's Kanai Nahara. she's a mom with 2 kids. I mean, so like she's not just a super Jewish woman, she's a super Jewish mother. Right? I think this is just great. All right, let's get into the text. Ready? We're on page 840. We have arrived at the boundary. So we left Egypt, we crossed the Red Sea, we got to Mount Sinai. We spent 2 years at Mount Sinai learning from God. Then we left Mount Sinai last week and schlepped across the desert, and we have now arrived at the boundaries of Eretz Canaan. We are outside of Egypt now 2 years. It took 2 years, to, including the 2 years that we waited at Mount Sinai to learn how to be God's people. It's a relatively short journey, right? So but we're now at the boundaries. What happens when you're at the boundary of everything you ever wanted in life? Let's see. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Send men to scout the land of Canaan, which I'm giving to the Israelite people. Send 1 man from each of their ancestral tribes, each one a chieftain among them." So Moses, by the Lord's command, sent them out from the wilderness of Paran, all the men being machers. Right? Everyone, push-push, had a fancy name. And these are all the names of the guys, right? When Moses sent them to scout the land, he said to them, I'm on page 841 at the bottom, 17. Go up there to the Negev, into the hill country, and see what kind of country it is. Are the people who dwell in it strong or weak, few or many? Is the country in which they dwell good or bad? Are the towns they live in open or fortified? Is the soil rich or poor? Is it wooded or not? Take pains to bring back some of the fruit of the land. It happened to be the season of grapes. What does he want them to do? What's the purpose of this mission? What's the purpose of this mission? Reconnaissance for what purpose, though? Settlement. For settlement. So why do you have to reconnoiter for settlement?
Who's there, who are we going to replace?
Well, but that's the question. So why do you need to know that? I mean, why is it important to know that? What's God's intent? What's the intention of this process, of this mission? Give what?
Give the people optimism.
All right, so he's expecting them to go in, come back, and say, it's the land of milk and honey, boys. Follow me. That's what he's expecting, right? Slicha? Right, let's go up and take the land. It's ours. Right? It's our land. That's what he's expecting. Because notice, of the things he's asking them to do, if this were a military reconnaissance, would it be the same instruction? What does a military reconnaissance sound like? Right, find out who's there. I mean, it does say, are they strong or weak? And are the cities fortified, right? But that's not the entirety of the mission. A military reconnaissance sounds somewhat different. Like, where are the roads? Where are the hills? Where are the traps? Okay? This is something different. This is go and figure out what this is like. So I want you to keep in mind this on many levels, right? Level 1 is they're going into the land to see the land that they're about to inherit. What kind of land is it? Is it the land that we were promised? Remember, these are not the children that ever heard the promise. They heard the promise from their parents, who heard it from their parents, who heard it from their parents. This is, you're 4 or 5 generations away from anyone who's ever seen this land before. What's it like? Well, we've been told it's a land of milk and honey. What's it like? But then deeper than that, there's a question here of this is your future. This is the dream. What's the dream look like? What's it like when you get to face your dreams? Are your dreams what you expected them to be? Or are they bigger or smaller? It's a very interesting thing. And then deeper than that, it's inside. Are you ready for this? So what happens? Let's take a look. They went up to scout the land from the wilderness of Tzin to Rehov to Lavo Hamat. They went up. I'm on page 842. Okay? They went up into the Negev and they came to Hebron, where lived Achiman and Shishai and Talmai, the Anakites. So the Torah knows that you know all of ancient Near Eastern mythology. How come you know all of ancient Near Eastern mythology? Because it was written by ancient Near Easterns, right? And these are themes that are in your cultural milieu. Now we live 3,500 years later. We don't live in that cultural milieu, and because we don't live in the cultural milieu, we go, huh? But for them, this was normal. I mean, you see, what's interesting about a culture is what it takes for granted, and the text takes for granted that you know this stuff. You know who these guys are, right? I was talking to my kid, and I said something, and then I said the same thing a second time. And then I said it a third time, and I said, ugh, I sound like a broken record. And my kid turned to me and said, what? Right? Pick up your phone and dial this number. Dial? Right? The world that I lived in, broken records and phones with dials and milk in bottles and watches with faces and the Soviet Union and the Bell Telephone Company. What's that?
Wind down the window.
Wind down a window. Right. Wind down a window. Right. Right. Gasoline that was served to you by a guy in a little white uniform would check your oil. You know, engines with oil. These are things that I grew up with. These are part of my cultural milieu that don't exist anymore. These guys, Achiman, Shisha, and Talmai, the Anakites, these were people that lived in that cultural milieu that don't exist anymore. We don't know what they were mythical beings, mythical creatures. Now, Hebron was founded 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. So that this is the Torah playing travel guide. Okay? Now, they reached the Wadi of Eshkol, and there they cut down a branch with a single cluster of grapes. It had to be borne on a carrying frame by two of them. Right? Anyone ever seen the emblem of the Israeli tourist agency? Yes. It's two guys with a bunch of grapes that look like basketballs. That's where it comes from. That's where it comes from, right? That's the origin of that image, right? The place was named Wadi Eshkol because of the cluster of grapes. Of course it was. They went to Eshkol and they found the grapes, and that's why they called it Eshkol. Columbus landed on Columbus Day, tried to cash a traveler's check. He couldn't do it because the banks were closed because it was Columbus Day. Da-dum-bum. At the end of 40 days, they returned from scouting the land. We're on page 843. Everybody okay? Yep. They went straight to Moses and Aaron and the whole Israelite community at Kadesh in the wilderness of Paran, and they made their report to them and to the whole community and showed them the fruit. And this is what they told them. We came to the land you sent us to. It does indeed flow with milk and honey, and this is the fruit. You've been living in the desert for 2 years. What does fruit look like? Ugh, fresh fruit, right? However, and here it gets complicated, the people who inhabit the country are powerful. The cities are fortified and very large. And we saw the Anakites there. Now, when the translator, when H.L. Ginsburg, who translated this, doesn't translate the thing, you know that he doesn't quite know what it is either, okay? So Anakites, the word Anak means giants. This was apparently some kind of mythical tribe that were, you know, gods. They were giants. There was something there that was scary, okay? We saw the demons of our nightmares there, okay? Yeah, Marsha.
How did they know all of these people? They walked into a city and see people. How did they know the names of all of these tribes?
They didn't. They just know the Anakites, right? Oh, and the next one. So the Anakites are the only ones they know. So they have a mythology, and the Torah assumes that their mythology and your mythology is the same. So that's why they're called Anakites. Okay? Someday, someone is going to read a 20th century thing and want to know who Klingons were. Okay? Anyone here know who Klingons were? Okay, just shake. You know. Okay? Now the Torah tells you, now the Torah adds this little travel note. Because the text is layered, right? So one layer of the text is what they're saying, and then the Torah jumps in with a travel note, right? This is the Rick Steves version of the Torah, right? Anakites dwelled in the Negev. Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites inhabited the hill country. Canaanites dwelt by the sea along the Jordan. In other words, it's a heavily populated country. It's a heavily populated land. The Torah knows, the people, it's not that the spies don't know this. The Torah knows this. The Torah is letting you know. And the Torah assumes you know who all these guys are. The Torah is assuming you know who these guys are. Anyone here ever met a Jebusite? Right? Very few left in the world. But the Torah is assuming this is part of your world. Okay? Okay? Now, so the message is twofold. It's a great land. It's everything our parents promised us. But we'll never take it. It'll never be ours. It's too mighty. It's beyond us. It's too hard for us. Okay? Anyone here who's a shrink? What happens to people who stand on the edge of achieving their dreams and are afraid to take the step into that next place? Afraid to take that next step, because if you take that next step and you fail, everything in your life falls apart. Afraid to take that next step. Afraid, right? The boy who comes to the rabbi the morning of his wedding and says, I love the girl with all my heart, I'm afraid to get married. Right? Right? It's usually the boy. Girls have the dress already, but the boys, or the fellow who says, I'm afraid to take the promotion, or the woman who's afraid to take the position, or what happens when you stand on the edge and you're afraid to take it because I might not be worthy, I might not be capable, it might not be mine, I might not be ready. There's that sense of, right? That's one level of it. Here's a different way to think about it, okay? Here's a different way to think about it. What are we in the desert? We're nomads. What is this land? It's a settled land. The nomad enjoys the freedom of the desert. The nomad lives wherever he pitches his tent. The nomad makes his living off the land. The nomad is not tied down. The nomad likes being unencumbered. The nomad looks with mixed feelings upon the settler, because he said, I could never live that way because I could never be tied down. And at the same time, the nomad secretly envies the settler because he envies the idea that he knows which bed he's going to sleep in every night. He knows the stability and safety and continuity of being a settler. Now turn it around. The settler looks at the nomad. The settler says, I have home, I have family, I have stability, I have continuity, I can build and accumulate accomplishment, culture, wealth. And the settler looks at the nomad with also mixed feelings, right? On the one hand, he condemns him and says, I could never live that insecure life. On the other hand, he secretly envies the nomad because of the freedom and the adventure of being the nomad. Right? So these are guys who are nomads, and what do they say? We'll never be settlers. We will never accomplish that life. We can't be tied down like that. And the settlers look back. We don't know what the residents of the land look back. Remember, the Israelites are 2.5 million people marching through the desert, right? We know what the settlers felt about the Israelites because that's what the Haftorah is about, right? The Haftorah tells you what happened a generation later when Joshua and his guys show up at the boundaries of Jericho. They're terrified. They're terrified of these guys. And it would be interesting to know, the other side of the New York Times article, which is what the Anakites thought of the Israelites coming in. And I guarantee you they felt the same way. They felt terrified because that's how settlers and nomads look upon each other. All right, ready?
How about the American Indians, the settlers, the railroad?
The American Indians and the settlers is a really interesting story.
Nothing like a dead Indian. Best Indian than dead Indian.
Yeah, well, that's what happened to they were invaders. They came in and
50,000 of them.
yeah, yeah.
So we did the same.
And you know what's interesting? There's this wonderful book by Sebastian Junger called Tribes. I talked about it last Rosh Hashanah. Tribes. And he quotes this statistic, which is actually verified by a number of different sources, that occasionally Indians would attack, Native Americans would attack settlements, right? And they would kidnap people. Yeah. No white people ever kidnapped by Indians ever returned to the white people when they had the chance to do so. They stayed with the Indians. In fact, there are cases in which these women were taken by the Indians, right? And when the white people tried to ransom them back, they didn't want to go. And when they did ransom them back, the women escaped and went back to the tribe. Go figure, okay? Right? Yeah, no, because there's something about living in a tribe. Anyway, take a look at the next one. We're on verse 30, 843. Everybody okay so far? Caleb hushed the people before Moses and said, so Caleb, there's 12 spies. Caleb and Joshua are the two that have a different idea about this, right? Let us by all means go up and we shall gain possession of it. Alona alevi or shenota. We'll take it, for we will surely overcome it. Ki yachol nuchala. We are able. Yachol nuchal means we are able to take this land. But the men who had gone up with him said, "We cannot attack that people, it's stronger than we are." And they spread calumnies, that means bad words, fake news, among the Israelites about the land they had scouted, saying, "The country we traversed and scouted is one that devours its settlers. Eretz ochelet yoshveha." A land it's a scary land, right? It devours us, and the people we saw are men of great size. There, we saw Nephilim, which are these mythical beings. The Anakites are part of Nephilim, and we looked like grasshoppers to ourselves, and so we looked to them. Explain. We looked like grasshoppers to ourselves, right? Which means we saw them and we felt small. That's called intimidation. But what's the next line? And so we appeared to them. That's called projection. Translate that. What does that mean?
You think they are seeing you as the way you see yourself.
So it's one thing to say, standing next to them, I felt intimidated. It's even a greater, it's another mental process to say, I can imagine how they looked at me. Right? How they looked. Anyone here have a teenage daughter? Anyone here have a teenage daughter who spends hours and hours and hours in front of a mirror? Right? Why do teenage daughters spend hours in front of a mirror? Because she's thinking about how I look to them. It's called self-consciousness, but it really isn't. It's really a very sophisticated mental process where I project myself into the eyes of the other and then regain a sense of myself. Sometimes this can turn pathological. You have a thing called anorexia, where no matter what I don't eat, I always look fat in the eyes of the other until you become emaciated, right? Because that's how I imagine myself to be in the eye, right? I imagine myself to be in the eyes of the other. So these people, they say, we go to the land, and what did they discover? We felt like grasshoppers. We felt like bugs, worms, nothing. And that's how we must have looked to them, or that's how we did look to them. And at this, God gets angry. And the Rashi is interesting. The tradition says the first statement, God didn't mind. That you say, I feel intimidated in front of people that are bigger than me, that's okay. But when you project like that, you demean yourself. And in demeaning yourself in that way, in losing all sense of self-respect, all sense of place in the world and of proportion in the world, that's where you've destroyed something precious. And at this, God gets angry. The community broke into loud cries, and they wept all night. Hang on one second. Let's just finish this one little piece, then I'll get. And the Israelites railed against Moses and Aaron. Now, here's your golden age, Michael. Ready? If only we had died in the land of Egypt. Oh, my God. Remember last week, Egypt with the chocolate fountain and the marshmallows and the snickerdoodles and the buffet, right? Now, the whole community, if only we had died in the wilderness. Why is the Lord taking us to the land to fall by the sword? Our wives and children will be carried off. It'd be better for us to go back to Egypt. That move, it was better for us then than it is now. That move, I don't want to go forward in my life. I want to go backwards. I'm afraid of what's ahead. I want to go back to what's secure, even if what's secure is horrid. I want to go back to it. Michael.
Well, what's always intrigued me about this part of the story is the lack of knowledge of history, at least as expressed in Torah.
Yeah. What?
Jacob and the children left Canaan
Yeah.
and left behind Bnei Israel. There were Hebrews, or Israelites, not Israelites, the Hebrews left in the land of Canaan.
They were, yeah.
They come back. Where, and there was no mention
No.
of these people who probably were going to welcome these people back.
Yeah, because the Torah hides them. The Torah hides them because the Torah wants you to believe that the entire people went to Egypt, and the entire people experienced Egypt, and the entire people experienced Sinai, and the entire people came back and experienced. The only place where you get a hint that there were Hebrews of some connection with these folks back in the land is at the end of the book of Joshua. And at the end of the 23rd chapter of Joshua, he has a covenant in a town called Shechem. Today that's called Nablus. And in that covenant, it appears that what he's doing is uniting the tribes that live there with the tribes who had just come back from Egypt. That's the only hint that they're here. But here, the myth is, exactly you said, the myth is everyone went to Egypt and everyone's coming back. And everyone has to go through this experience.
James Parks, the great Judeophile who, from England, wrote a book about this. He does an Institute of Judaism in England that they founded his name. He wrote a whole book about this, the Bnei Israel, and he hypothesized on all of this. And it's a wonderful book.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of archaeology because they're trying to understand what Joshua does at the end of the book. Let's finish the story. Ready? Let's head back to Egypt. How many of you are ready to go back to Egypt with me? At least in Egypt, we were settled and we knew what tomorrow would bring. Right? Let's go back to the golden age. Let's go back to things the way they were. Right? Main Street, USA, and Disneyland. The sweet days of the 1890s. Right? Is that the sweet days of the 18? And you know what's interesting about Main Street, USA, by the way, in Disneyland? I know a lot about Disneyland because I study this. I'm a rabbi, right? It's the whole town is a 7/8 scale. They actually made it smaller. The dimensions of the buildings, of the windows, were very carefully designed, so the whole thing seems manageable and small. Because you just came from LA, which is a huge, unmanageable, ungovernable, incomprehensibly complex metropolis. I'm going to put you in a town where everything, you can wrap your arms around, literally wrap your arms around everything. Because that's the golden age of America. My God, ladies and gentlemen, if you elect me, I promise to bring America back to its glory days when everything was nice.
Without penicillin.
Without what?
Penicillin.
Yeah, penicillin, feminism, multiculturalism, political correctness. Back to a time when you could understand people and they didn't use those filthy words on the television. In fact, who needs television? There is this need, let's go back to when things were simpler. Let's go back to when things were manageable. Because the nice thing about yesterday was, it's predictable. Because we can think backwards and control it, right? It's predictable. Yeah. Going forward, who the hell knows what's going to happen? Who the hell knows what's going to happen? You get this here? Now, if you're the intrepid explorers, then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces. This is a pattern of theirs. When confronted, Moses can't respond. He can't respond. First of all, he was never a slave, so he can't relate to this experience. He was always a nomad. He spent 40 years as a Midianite. Midianite is the name of nomad. That's what nomads were. And beyond that, he doesn't have the verbal capacity to argue back, right? And Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, son of Yefuneh, are the ones who scouted. They rent their clothes, and they exhorted the community. The land that we traversed is exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will bring us into that land, a land that flows with milk and honey. You must not rebel. Have faith. Not rebel against the Lord. Have no fear of the people of the country, for they are our prey. Their protection is departed from them. The Lord is with us. Have no fear. The Hebrew is much better. You've got to learn Hebrew. Look at the Hebrew. It's the last line on page 845. I'll translate. Ach ba'Adonai al timrudu. Don't rebel against God. Ve'atem, you guys, al tiru. Don't be afraid. Et ha'am ha'aretz ki lachmenu hem. Ki lachmenu hem. Literally, they're toast. They're our bread. Lechem, lachmenu. They're our bread. They're toast. We're going to eat them for lunch. They're toast for us. Come on. And now, objectively, who's right? Objective. If you're writing for the New York Times, which, as we all know, is the objective source of truth, do you say the people of this land are mighty and fortified and strong, and the Israelites have no chance? I mean, you're a Vegas odds maker. Who would you bet on? Or would you bet on 2.5 million desert people escaping from slavery and coming in? You probably bet on the Israelites. If you read the Haftarah, you'll discover that the Canaanites bet on the Israelites. I mean,
Not the New York Times.
well, the New York Times, you're right. The New York Times would probably condemn them as invaders, right? But you just, this is all self-perception. Do you see yourself as capable of reaching to your dreams? Or do you stand at the edge of your dreams and say, I'm not worthy, I'm not capable, I'm not strong enough, and I'm frightened because I can't control tomorrow the way that I can imagine yesterday? All right, Doug, got a lot of questions. So it's Bobby, Douglas, go ahead, Bob.
Okay, so my basic question is, how do you teach people, human beings, not to take that first step into the unknown? That's the basic question.
No, how to do it.
Teach them to take it.
Right,
As a parent, we encourage our kids
yeah,
oh, I'm afraid, I've never done it before. No, you can do it because.
right,
Usually, what I say is, well, you've already done this and this.
yeah.
You can't have confidence, so I've learned, without actually having tried something and succeeded at it. So I'm, as a parent and, trying to teach the kids to
Yeah,
take
yeah, yeah.
that step.
Yeah,
So as an adult, obviously, you still
yeah.
have that issue.
So here, let me just interrupt you for a second. So here is the paradox of parenthood. The paradox of parenthood is that I am the all-powerful protecting parent trying to teach a kid to be independent and self-confident. Right? And by the way, and I want the kid to do what I tell him to do. Be independent. Don't listen to me, right? You see, how does an all-powerful protective parent teach a kid to act independently, to be fearless, to be confident, even when I'm not there? How do you teach a kid to do that? That's the paradox of parenthood. Be independent, right? Because like every time my mother would say, do whatever you want, I knew that she didn't mean it. What she really meant was, do what I told you to do, right? Do what I tell you to do. Right? How do you teach a child to act independently in the world? How do you teach an adult to act independently in the world? And here you have a classic parental situation, because you have a God who's done everything for these people. And that's part of the paradox of this particular story. God took them out of Egypt. God destroyed the Pharaoh. God sent the plagues. God brought them across the sea. God brought them to Sinai. God told them what to do at Sinai. God punished them when they did something wrong at Sinai. When they did act on their own and they built a golden calf, he smashed them, right? Be independent, the parent says. The kid says, I did, and you hit me, like you took away my allowance, you grounded me, right? Right? So the parent says, that's because you were independent in the wrong way. Well, what do you want out of my life, says the kid. So at a certain point, you get to the land and you say, okay, now you're independent. Now I'm independent? Now, suddenly, mazel tov, right? That's why I got to tell you that I think, having sent 3 kids through university now, I think it's the most loony social experiment in the history of the world. In the history of world culture, we take 18-year-olds and we put them in, because the 18-year-olds have no internal control. In the history of the world, we take 18-year-olds who have no internal control, and we put them in environments where there is maximum external control, the Marine Corps and a convent, right? And you say, okay, now grow internal discipline, but not in America. In America, you bring the kid to the University of Arizona, right, or to Indiana University or to UCLA, and you give the kid $50, put him in a dorm room and say, go, buy dope. I mean, have fun, learn, be independent. There's no adult supervision. And then we say, isn't it strange that college students have binge drinking? Well, what do you expect? There's no internal control. It's girls gone wild. Now, as a college student, I cherish that freedom. It's because I was old enough to use it. But my kids, what do they know, right? No, seriously, it becomes a very serious problem. It's a very bizarre thing. You protected the kid and you guided the kid and you gave the kid all this external control, and then you put him in a complete open arena where there's no control whatsoever, and you say, gee, I hope he doesn't hurt himself. So the kids show up to class in pajamas, you know. No one taught them how to get dressed in the morning because there's mommy there to get dressed. I mean, it's a really interesting case, right? How do you teach people the internal strength to make decisions for themselves? All right, a lot of other questions. Yeah, Douglas, you were next.
First of all, when you go to college, they're being taught by professors who've never left that environment, so they have no internal.
They wear pajamas to class.
I wanted to ask a question about the role of God in this.
The role of God in this. Good.
Because if God is the parent here, God invites them to take this trip.
Yes.
And yet you go to Deuteronomy 1:22.
And what happens?
Moses says, you bunch of morons, you did this.
Yeah.
So there's a real
No, not you bunch of morons. Your moron parents.
Right.
In Deuteronomy 1, the same story Douglas is referring to is told over again in Deuteronomy. So if you have a minute, put your finger here and turn with me. Let's just take a look, okay? Page 986. Page 986, right? So this is Moses, but this isn't Moses talking to these people. This is Moses 40 years or 38 years later talking to their kinderlach, to their kids. And the question the kids are going to want to know is, Moshe, 986, right, 986. Why did it take 40 years to make a journey that normally takes 3 weeks? Right? Now, I've been on Southwest Airlines. This has happened to me. Right? But why did it take 40 years to make a journey that takes 3 weeks, 2 weeks? You can do it in 2 weeks. You know, you can go back and forth in a month. Why did it take 40 years? So he's explaining to them, here's the story. Right? Right? So it says, we got to Kadesh Barnea. And I said to you, we've come to the hill country of the Amorites, which the Lord your God has given us. See, the Lord God has placed the land at your disposal. Go up, take possession, as the Lord, the God of your fathers, promised you. Fear not and be dismayed. Be not dismayed. We got to the boundary of the land, and I said to your parents, we're home, we're here. Take the land. God will fight for you. But they said, then all of you, your parents, came to me and said, let us send men ahead to reconnoiter the land for us and bring us back word on the route that we shall follow and the cities we shall come to. I approved of the plan, and so I selected 12 of your men, one from each tribe. They made for the hill country. They came to the Wadi Eshkol. They sparted out. They took some of the fruit. They brought it down. They gave us this report. It is a good land that the Lord your God has given us. Yet you refused to go up. You, your parents, refused to go up. You sulked in your tents and said, it is because the Lord hates us that he brought us out of the land of Egypt to hand us over to the Amorites to wipe us out. What kind of place are we going to? Our kinsmen have taken heart out of us, saying, we saw there are people stronger and taller than we. What is this tall business? Those short Jews? What's the problem here?
It's Nathan when he in jail.
Is that what it is?
He ended the producer.
Yeah.
Going through, he did this and he did this.
Yeah, right. It's Woody Allen. I mean, there's a whole country of Woody Allens, right? Right? Large cities with walls sky high and even Anakites. And I said to you, have no dread or fear of them. None other than the Lord your God who goes before you will fight for you, just as he did in Egypt before your very eyes, in the wilderness where you saw how the Lord your God carried you as a man carries his son all the way that you traveled and came to this place. Yet for all that you have no faith in God, who goes before you on journeys to scout the place when you're encamped in fire by night and cloud by day and guide you on there. For a guy that can't talk, he's got a lot to say, right? And when the Lord heard your complaint. So, when Moses tells the story 40 years later, it changed. Yeah. What's the story now? It was your idea, not mine. It was the people's idea. And even then, he leaves out the 10 tribes. It's all this. He leaves out the. But he preserves this one element, which is we were afraid. We were afraid. And the fear of what was ahead of us destroyed any possibility of ever achieving the dream. Marcia.
It's a little confusing to me.
Good.
God is telling the Israelites to go make war and take over this land. And we have people today whose Lord is saying, go in and take over this land.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's a very bad example. That's why when someone comes to me and says, Rabbi, I have really good news. God just told me, right? That's why I call for the security people to come. Because that's really scary. That's why the rabbis at a certain point in the history of our people said, no more listening to voices from God.
When did that happen?
During Talmudic times, in early Mishnaic times, 2,000 years ago. Because the next line could be, right, we talked about this the other day, the next line could be, God told me to kill every rabbi I see. That worries me. Right? So it's very scary because you can't negotiate with someone who says God spoke to them. You end up with Jonestown, that kind of thing. So that's why we stop listening to voices, and instead we have a different way of deliberating divine will in the world. We do it through the book and through a community of conversation and conscience. Maury.
Where were Caleb and Joshua's tribes?
Caleb and Joshua's tribes?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Their representative said it's good land.
Yes, they become the two principal tribes of Israel, by the way.
Yeah, Judah and Ephraim.
Judah and Ephraim. So Ephraim is the northern kingdom and Judah is the southern kingdom, and they become
80,000 men.
they become the two principal tribes. But you can't. The whole rest of the people doesn't want to go. It's a problem. It's a serious problem. Yes, please.
How come after so many miracles in the desert,
Yeah.
they still didn't believe God will help them to conquer the land?
That's a very good question. What do you think? How come after so many years in the desert they still don't believe that God was going to help them conquer the land? I mean, why do they follow the 10 and not the 2? Right? And the question is, but because when you're faced with a situation that you've never faced before, and you're called upon to marshal resources which you don't know you have, and you don't know what the outcome's going to be, and you're frightened that what's coming could be terribly difficult for you, and you say, I'm not able, I'm not capable, I'm not able to rise to this moment. You see? It's a very difficult question. It's not a question of faith in God at this point. It's a question of faith in self. It's a question of how I see myself. It's perception. I see myself as a grasshopper. What does that mean? Think about that for a second. I see myself as a grasshopper. I see myself as a bug in the world. I am not a subject of history. I am the object of history. History molds and shapes me. I don't have a say in the conditions of my own existence.
But this is not the slaves, this is the new generation.
The new generation is going to go and take the land. They're going to be fine. But the slave generation, their parents, their self-conception is broken. There's a very famous story. I don't know if it's true, but it's too good a story not to be. It should be true. That, Houdini could break out of any jail. So there was a guy once that said, come, I got a jail you can't break out of. And they put Houdini in his jail cell, and for an hour he worked on it. And when they finally found him, he was crumpled on the floor, sweating profusely, and he says, I give up. I can't open the door. And the jailer said, sure you can. And the jailer took hold of the door, and just with one pull, he opened the door. It was never locked. As long as the door was locked in Houdini's mind, he couldn't open the door. It never occurred to him, just shove the door open, right? If that's the limit of your self-perception, that's as far as you can go. This people has a limited self-perception. They can't go beyond. And God is going to get really angry and frustrated because God can't liberate them. This is going to take a while. And that, as I said when we first started the book of Numbers, that's the voice of the idealist. The idealist gets really disenchanted when they can't change the world because the human material out of which a new society is supposed to come, that human material is much harder to mold. It's so much easier to do it theoretically. You write the Communist Manifesto and the world gets better. It's really very hard to actually do this on the ground. It's very, very difficult. It takes a long time. David, you had your hand up a moment ago. Where's David Gill? Please.
I think we're hardwired to be fearful. And that fear is a self-preservation mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
And it isn't so clear to me that it's a virtue to be able to charge and to be on top.
Yeah.
And I think there's a balance. This is post hoc
So you're
justifying what happened.
David's a defense attorney for the Israelites. You're doing good. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I submit to you the following. Gods are local. Yeah, this God could destroy Egypt, but that doesn't mean that he's ready to destroy Canaan. You know, you think of this God as universal, but what evidence do we have of that, you know? And second of all, what makes you think that they can take? I mean, you're right. There's a lot to say for their self-preservation instincts. Go ahead,
They
please.
at least got a hung jury.
Yeah. I was going to say something really horrible about 2 tablets, but I'm not going to say that. Elon, go ahead.
So since when is there 100% unanimity when making what community makes any decision?
Especially among Jews.
Well, but in this particular case, some of the community decided to invade Canaan.
Yeah.
And then they were destroyed.
Yeah, that comes a little bit later, right.
The fact is that when we make decisions, we always have a little hesitation.
Yep.
How many of us are 100% certain of our new direction?
Yeah, no, that's actually very important.
And so, I guess, what is the turning point at which you kind of go that way versus you go that way?
Well.
In this case, 80% were not quite willing to go forward.
4 out of 5 dentists agree, right.
Like 50% or 60 or 70?
See, that's a really interesting question. Had it not been 10 spies, had it only been 6, would they have listened? That's a really interesting question. And how do you make those kind of decisions? Pop, yeah.
The Torah writes a lot of stories to teach us something. And I wonder what this story is to teach us, because historically, the desert warriors were continually invading the settled areas because they were hungry and food was in those areas.
Right,
And
right.
they continued it. So why did the Torah put this story in there? What are they trying to teach us?
Well, that's what I'm trying to point out. They're trying to teach, I think they're trying to teach you about what it means to stand on the verge of your dreams and not be able to take the step inward. And what it means to discover that part of yourself. Yeah. Yes?
And it's little.
Yeah.
But it's Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead.
Yeah.
It's
Great play.
what we never talk about is the acknowledgement of what was good. There's no subtlety anymore, Ed.
Mm-hmm.
And so you say, well, of course it wasn't good for the slaves in Israel and blah, blah, blah. But
Egypt.
yes, there was a moment when someone had a child and held it and life was beautiful.
Yeah.
Yes, there was a moment when
Yeah.
you left your grandparents in the grave there.
Mm-hmm.
And so psychologically not to acknowledge what was precious means that it comes back and gets you.
No, right. But you're not going to go back to it. You have to move
but
forward.
At least you have to give it its own moment, otherwise
Right.
it gets you.
This from a mom who's about to send a kid to college. So, no, you're right. Right, and you can cherish the baby, but you got to let her go, and you got to let her go off to college. I know. This is the psychoanalysis you bought. So, Sherry.
So what if you're 90 years old? Is there still a dream? Is there still?
There's some people in the room who are 90 years old. Mort's passed 90 a long time ago. So yes, that's what it means to be alive. Look, I can tell you, I know a couple of people who are not. I spent 25 years sitting next to Harold Schulweis on the pulpit, and he had so many unfinished projects, so many dreams, so many unfinished books, so many articles, so much stuff. That's what it means to be alive. The moment you say, I'm done, you're done, no matter what age you are. There are people who die at 30. We don't bury them till they're 90. Because they said, okay, I'm done. I'm finished. Got nothing else to accomplish. That's a very sad thing in the world, by the way. All right, let's do one more thing. Douglas, really quick. All right, so here's what I want you to do. I want you to do 2 things. I want you to go back to the beginning of the Parsha on page 840, and then I want you to go to the end of the Parsha on page 854. Try to put those 2 pages together. Real quick, we'll finish. At the end of the Torah portion, we have a series of laws. At the end of the Torah portion, there's a series of laws. And I want you to see how these laws come to interpret the sections that we've just read. Okay? For one thing, which we won't read right now, the section about forgiveness that we read on Yom Kippur comes from this Torah portion. Salachti kidvarecha. God says to Moses, I'm not going with this people anymore. I can't stand them. Moses says, if you don't go, I don't go. I'll die here. God says, okay, I'll go with them. Salachti kidvarecha. What does it mean that on Yom Kippur, as the new year is about to begin, we read that vignette right after Kol Nidre? Which means every Yom Kippur, the tradition makes it, the machzor, the prayer book, brings us back to this moment. As we're about to begin a new year, don't be afraid. Salachti kidvarecha. But here's the one I want you to take a look at. You all know this section because you all daven once in a while. Look at page 854. Ready? Right? The last line on the page, 854, it's the maftir. Vayomer Adonai Moshe lemor. God spoke to Moses, this is what he said. Deber al bnei Yisrael ve'amarta alehem v'sulem tzitzit. Speak to the people of Israel and tell them to make fringes. Little stringy things. At least that's what we call them today. Al kanfei bigdeihem ledorotam, on all their clothes. V'natnu al tzitzit t'ganaptu t'chelet. Make one of them blue. Vayalachem letzitzit. They're going to be reminders to you. Vorita motem, you will see them. Uschartem et kol mitzvot Adonai, and you'll remember God's mitzvot, God's commandments. Vasitem otam, and you might do them. And here's the line I want you to look at. V'lo taturu acharei levavchem v'yacharei nechem, asher atem zonim achareihem. V'lo taturu. Lo taturu. What a strange phrase. How is it translated? That shall be your fringe. Look at it, recall all the commandments, and observe them, so you do not follow your heart and your eyes in lustful urges. Lo taturu. That's not a good translation. Lo taturu. What does taturu mean? Well, take a look. Put your finger here. Come back to the beginning of the Parsha. Right? Vaydaber Adonai Moshe lemor. God spoke to Moses and said, Shlach lecha anashim, send guys, Vayaturu et aretz Canaan. They were commanded to do what? Well, here's the interesting word. The word latur is an English word. To be a tourist. Taturu means to be a tourist. They were told, lo taturu. They were first told, go into the land. Latur, to see the land, to spazier in the land. Right? And they came back with this report. They were not told, go up to the land and possess it. They were told, go up to the land and walk around. What's the difference between a tourist and an immigrant? What's the difference between a tourist and a refugee? What is the mentality of tourist? You're not planning to stay there. You don't belong there. You're there only temporarily, and then you're going to go back to the place where you're more settled. Right? Tourists. I mean, I like being a tourist, by the way, you know, because it's comforting, right? You go to this weird place, and you sit on the bus with behind very heavy smoked glass windows, and a guy speaks to you in English and tells you what you're seeing. Right? It's really different when you get off the bus and you mix with the population. Anybody do this when they go traveling? Anybody like to go to, I like to go to grocery stores when I travel. I like to see what people eat, how people shop. I like to talk to people. I buy spices. I always go into grocery stores and ask some person shopping. I look for a lady because she looks like she knows how to cook. And I ask her, show me the 4 spices you use most. And that's what I bring back from, the customs people hate me because they think I'm importing dope. But it's oregano, I promise you. But it's a different mentality when you go to a place latur than if you go to a place lagur, to live, to settle, to root yourself. What's that?
There's a real good joke about that. About the guy who wanted to know before he dies, what's hell like, what's heaven like?
Yeah.
So he goes to hell. Everybody's playing golf and they're drinking and they're dancing and they're gambling. It's wonderful. Then he goes to heaven. Everybody's sitting studying Torah. So when he dies, he says to God, I want to go to hell. So he goes down to hell. Everybody's in schmutz, working hard, slaving. And he says to the devil, how come before when I was here, everything was so wonderful and now you got this? The devil says, before you were a tourist, now you're an immigrant.
There you go.
That's where you got it.
That's where you go. So just to finish. You wear a talit with tzitzit. Every talit has tzitzit on it. And the purpose of that is shelo taturu. What does that mean? Shelo taturu. Walk the world, but don't be a tourist. Don't walk in the world as if it doesn't belong to you. Don't walk in the world as if you aren't responsible for this place. Don't walk in the world as if you have no roots in this community. Don't walk in the world and see things and just walk by them as if they don't belong to you. Lo taturu. That's what, it's such an interesting thing, and it's at the end of the Parsha on purpose, and the word has to be on purpose because it's not used anywhere else in Torah. The purpose of the whole tzitzit ritual is, I don't want you being like those spies, seeing a place, judging it, and then walking by. If you're going to live in my world, what do you need to do? You need to root yourself and belong, and it belongs to you, and you have to take care of it, and you have to be responsible for it, and you have to say, it's mine, I'm worthy of it, and it's worthy of my attention. It's a whole different attitude, right? Remember, there used to be a wonderful book called The Accidental Tourist. Never see that book? The movie sucks, but the book was wonderful. It's about a guy who wrote travel guides for businessmen who don't want to see the local place. So you go to Beijing and eat in Kentucky Fried Chicken. I have a neighbor who does this. He goes all over the world and he stays in a Hilton hotel and he eats a steak in the restaurant. And I said to him, like, if you're going to go, he went to New Delhi for God's sakes. I said, so why bother? Like, stay home and eat McDonald's. And the answer is, lo taturu, that's not the way you're to accept the world. Because you have to have enough courage to touch the world. But more than that, you have to have a deep sense of responsibility and rootedness. I think this is an interpretation of the story we just read. Next week, the greatest rebellion of all. Take good care. You feeling good?